My stepsister did this to me in the kitchen. True infidelity story. Welcome back to our channel, Love 30K Stories. My name is Daniel, I'm 22 years old. Today I will reveal a memorable story between me and my stepsister. It was an indescribable experience with many different emotions. But before we continue, please take a moment to like and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us. That afternoon in the kitchen was one of the most exhilarating yet insane experiences of my life, all thanks to my stepsister Nancy. It was a typical Tuesday and the house felt unusually quiet, almost unsettlingly so, except for the soft ticking of the kitchen's wall clock. I'd spent most of the day alone, aimlessly scrolling through TV channels in a half-hearted attempt to kill time. My dad and his wife, Betty, were out, likely running errands or doing whatever they usually did when they vanished together. That left just me and Nancy at home. Nancy and I weren't particularly close. Although we were around the same age, we couldn't have been more different. She was the type who thrived on organization and precision, while I was the opposite. I was the relaxed, go-with-the-flow kind of person, happy to take life as it came. My bond with Nancy had always been polite but distant. We shared the same house, exchanging the occasional friendly nod or greeting, but that was about it. Recently, though, things have started to change. Over the past few weeks, I began noticing subtle differences in how Nancy acted around me. At first, I thought I was imagining it, the way her gaze seemed to linger on me a little longer than usual, or how she always seemed to find reasons to be in the same room, sitting just a bit too near for comfort. It wasn't anything clear, nothing anyone else would pick up on, but I could feel it. It was subtle, yet undeniable, and it was beginning to drive me mad. That afternoon, I sat in the kitchen, scrolling through my phone as sunlight poured through the windows. I tried my best to ignore the peculiar tension that seemed to linger whenever Nancy was nearby. She'd been in her room all day, or so I assumed, but the sound of footsteps behind me told me she was about to make her presence known. I held my breath as pain and disquiet did the both of us. At last, she came down the hallway, bringing her planter with her to the center of the room. "Hey," Nancy's voice broke the silence as she stepped into the kitchen. I glanced up from my phone to see her standing in the doorway, arms crossed over her chest. She appeared calm, but there was something in her eyes that made my heart race just a bit faster. "Hey," I replied, keeping my tone casual as I tried to mask my unease. "What's up?" She shrugged and walked further into the kitchen, her gaze locked on mine. "Not much. Just felt like coming downstairs." Hey, it's pretty quiet in here," Nancy said. I nodded, placing my phone on the table. "Yeah, it is. Betty and Dad won't be back for a while." She looked at the clock, then back at me, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I know. That's why I came down." Their words made my stomach tighten, though I wasn't sure why. There was something different about her expression, playful yet oddly serious, that left me both uneasy and intrigued. Nancy moved toward the stove, grabbing a glass from the cabinet and filling it with water. Her movements were slow and deliberate, almost as if she knew I was watching her. And I was. I couldn't help it. There was something about the way she moved, the way her hair fell loosely over her shoulders, the curve of her lips and that subtle, knowing smile that made it hard to look away. "What are you doing in here all alone?" she asked, taking a sip from her glass before leaning against the counter. I shrugged, trying to keep my tone casual. "Just bored, I guess, passing the time until they get back." She nodded, her gaze still fixed on mine. "You've been acting strange lately." Her comment caught me off guard, and I frowned slightly. "Strange? What do you mean?" Nancy tilted her head, her smile growing just a little wider. "I don't know. You've been staying away from me." I blinked, caught off guard by her remark. I hadn't realized I might be avoiding her, but maybe I was. It wasn't deliberate, yet the tension simmering between us had been intensifying, and I felt clueless about how to deal with it. "I'm not avoiding you," I said, though my tone betrayed a lack of confidence. She arched an eyebrow and placed her glass on the counter. "Really? Because it certainly feels like you are." I shifted uneasily in my chair, unsure of what to say. The truth was, I had been steering clear of Nancy. I couldn't pinpoint the reason, but something between us had shifted, and I didn't know how to handle it. I wasn't sure if it was just me or if she noticed it too, but either way, I had been trying to pretend it wasn't there. "I've just been busy," I mumbled weakly, knowing it was a poor excuse. Nancy's smile grew, and she moved a step closer, her eyes sparkling with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. "Busy, huh? Too busy to even talk to me?" Her tone was playful, almost teasing, but I could feel something deeper beneath it, something more serious. She wasn't just joking. There was a weight to her words, an unspoken truth she wasn't voicing. "I'm not avoiding you, Nancy," I said again, though my voice was softer now, less certain. "Ah." She stepped closer, narrowing the space between us until she was only a few feet away. The tension in the room was palpable, thickening the air around us and making it hard to ignore. My heart raced, and I swallowed hard, struggling to maintain my calm. "I think you are," she murmured, her gaze locked on mine, "but you don't have to be." Her words caught me off guard, and I blinked in surprise. The room seemed to close in around us, the distance between us vanishing with every passing moment. Nancy's presence was almost suffocating, her closeness making it impossible to think clearly. "I don't know what you mean," I replied, though my voice lacked conviction. Nancy moved closer, her face now just inches away. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, the heat of her presence making my pulse race even faster. My chest tightened, and my thoughts spun wildly as I tried to make sense of what was unfolding. This was Nancy, my stepsister, someone I had shared a home with for 2 years. Yet, at this moment, she didn't feel like family. She felt like something entirely different. My fingers drummed in the dark. "You don't have to pretend," she whispered, her voice so soft it was almost lost in the air between us. "I know you felt it too." Her words hit me like a jolt, and I froze, my breath catching. She was right. I had felt it. The tension, the unspoken connection that had been lingering between us for weeks. I had tried to push it aside, to tell myself it wasn't real, but now, with her standing so close and her eyes piercing into mine, there was no escaping the truth anymore. I began, but the words faltered, dissolving into silence as my mind struggled to piece together a coherent thought. Then Nancy moved, her hand reaching out to lightly graze my arm. The touch was feather-light, almost imperceptible, yet it sent a surge of electricity racing through me, my pulse quickening in response. "You don't have to say anything," she murmured, her lips curving into a small, knowing smile. "Just stop pretending." Before I could gather myself to reply, she leaned in, her lips brushing softly against my cheek. The action was subtle, almost innocent, yet it ignited every nerve in my body, leaving me utterly electrified. I stood rooted to the spot, unable to move or think, as the weight of the moment crashed down on me. This wasn't just in my imagination. This wasn't some silent tension I had conjured up in my mind. Nancy felt it too, and there was no turning back now. I remained motionless as Nancy's lips grazed my cheek. It wasn't a full kiss, more of a fleeting touch, a promise of something deeper. but it was enough to send my heart racing. I could feel the warmth of her breath on my skin, the delicate pressure of her lips lingering in the charged space between us. "Nancy," I murmured, my voice barely more than a whisper. I wasn't even sure what I wanted to say. A part of me wanted to pull away, to stop this from escalating further, but another part, the part I had been trying to suppress, wanted her to stay, wanted to see where this might lead. She didn't step back. Instead, she gave me that same soft, knowing smile that made my pulse quicken. "What?" she asked, with feigned innocence, as though nothing unusual had happened. But the tension between us was undeniable now, crackling in the air like static electricity. "We shouldn't," I began, but the words felt meaningless, as though I didn't truly believe them. My thoughts were a whirlwind, struggling to grasp the reality of the moment. This was Nancy, my stepsister. This wasn't right, was it? Yet she moved closer, her body brushing softly against mine, her warmth seeping into me. Her hand rose, resting gently on my chest, and I felt my breath catch. A surge of emotions swept over me, confusion, exhilaration, fear, and something deep. "Who says we shouldn't?" she whispered, her eyes locking onto mine with a daring intensity. Her gaze was a challenge, a question lingering unspoken between us. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my thoughts, but her presence made it impossible. Her touch sent jolts through me, clouding my mind. "You know why," I replied, though my voice wavered, uncertain. Nancy's hand glided downward, her fingers tracing a slow, deliberate line that made my heart pound even harder. "Do I?" she murmured, her lips curling into a teasing smile. "Because from where I'm standing, it seems like you've wanted this just as much as I have." Her words struck me like a jolt, and I froze, my thoughts spinning. Could she be right? Had I been yearning for this all along without realizing it? The idea sent a shiver down my spine, guilt bubbling up inside me, yet alongside the guilt, there was something stronger, something undeniable. A part of me had been silently waiting for this moment, craving it in ways I hadn't understood. Until now. I began, but my voice faltered, the words dying on my tongue. Nancy stepped closer, her body now fully pressed against mine, and I could feel the rapid thrum of her heartbeat echoing through her chest. Her gaze was piercing, a blend of curiosity and longing that rooted me in place, making it impossible to look away. "You don't have to be scared," she whispered, her hand sliding up to rest gently on my neck, her thumb brushing softly along my jawline. "You don't have to keep pretending." It felt as though the ground beneath me was shifting, the world tilting off balance, leaving me spinning. Everything about this felt so wrong, yet so irresistibly right, as if we had been hurtling toward this moment all along, even if neither of us had dared to acknowledge it. "Nancy, this is—" I attempted to say, but my voice faltered, the words slipping away. She shook her head gently, silencing me with the lightest touch, her fingers brushing softly against my lips. "It's okay," she said, her voice calm and steady. "You don't have to say anything." Before I could react, she leaned in, her lips meeting mine in a kiss that was both tender and electrifying. At first it was soft, almost hesitant, as though she was giving me the chance to pull away. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I found myself responding, my lips moving with hers as my hands instinctively settled on her waist, drawing her closer. The kiss deepened, slow and purposeful, and a rush of heat spread through me like wildfire. She leaned forward and pressed a kiss in my mouth this morning. Every nerve in my body felt alive, every inch of my skin tingling with the overwhelming intensity of the moment. Nancy's fingers wove into my hair, her body pressing against mine so closely it left me breathless. This was real, unfolding right before me, and I didn't want it to end. When we finally broke apart, both of us gasped for air, our foreheads leaning together as we struggled to steady ourselves. The world around us seemed to fade, and for a fleeting moment, it felt as though time had stopped, like nothing else existed but the two of us, standing there in the kitchen, swept up in something neither of us had anticipated. "What just occurred?" I asked, my voice trembling with disbelief. Nancy gave me a soft, almost teasing smile as her eyes met mine. "What does it feel like?" she asked. I swallowed hard, my thoughts a chaotic swirl. I didn't have an answer. It felt as though everything had shifted, like the tension that had been building between us for weeks had finally erupted. But it also felt irreversible, as if there was no way to undo what had just transpired. "I don't know," I murmured, my hands still resting on her waist. "But we can't do this." Her smile faltered slightly, but she didn't step away. Instead, she gazed at me with such intensity that my heart began to race all over again. "Why not?" she murmured gently. "Why can't we?" Her words sent a rush of confusion and excitement through me, twisting my stomach into knots. This felt wrong. It had to be wrong. Yet the way she looked at me, the way she had kissed me, it all felt so vivid, so undeniable. "I mean, you're my stepsister," I stammered, though even as I said it, the words sounded more like a feeble excuse than a valid reason. Nancy arched an eyebrow, her smile slowly returning. "So what?" she said, her tone soft but resolute. "We're not related by blood. We're just two people. You don't have to let that stop you." Her reasoning made my head spin. Technically, she was right. We weren't blood relatives, just connected through our parents' marriage. But even so, the weight of that reality loomed over me like a heavy shadow. "What about them? What about Dad and Betty?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Nancy's smile faded, and she exhaled softly, stepping back just enough to create a sliver of space between us. "I don't know," she admitted quietly, "but I do know that I can't keep pretending nothing's happening between us." Her words hit me like a wave, stirring up a storm of emotions inside me. Guilt, uncertainty, and something deeper, something I wasn't ready to name. She was right. We couldn't keep pretending anymore. The strain between us had been simmering for far too long, and now that it had finally erupted, there was no turning back. But where did we go from here? "I don't think we can just ignore this," I murmured, my thoughts still racing. Nancy gave a small nod, her expression softening as she met my gaze. "We don't have to figure everything out right now," she said gently. "We can take it one step at a time." Her reassurance brought an unexpected calm to the turmoil swirling within me. She was right. We didn't need to have all the answers immediately. What mattered was being truthful, with ourselves and with each other, about what was happening. And seeing it made my heart feel lighter. "We'll figure it out," she said softly. "Together." In that moment, I believed her. But deep down, I knew the story was far from over. The days following that moment in the kitchen blurred into a haze, and the tension between Nancy and me only intensified. It wasn't just the memory of the kiss or how her touch had ignited something in me. It was the unshakable reality that we had crossed a line, one that couldn't be undone. Everything had changed, and we both knew it. But we tried to carry on as if nothing had happened, pretending our lives were the same as before. But it was futile. Every time we shared a room, the air felt heavy with unspoken words, thick with an electric charge. Every glance, every accidental brush of skin sent my heart racing, and I could see the same spark mirrored in Nancy's eyes. It was as if some invisible force was drawing us together, even though we both understood the risks. Around a week later, I was sitting on the couch in the living room, pretending to watch TV while my thoughts drifted elsewhere. From the kitchen, I could hear Nancy moving around, the soft clinking of plates and the gentle thud of cabinet doors as she tidied up after dinner. The sound was ordinary, yet it pulled at my attention. My dad and Betty went out again, likely attending some dinner party, leaving the house eerily quiet with just the two of us inside. The silence felt overwhelming, amplifying my thoughts until they were impossible to ignore. I couldn't stop replaying moments with Nancy, the way she had looked at me, the feeling of her lips on mine, and how her touch seemed to linger long after she pulled away. Every second alone with her was charged with an unspoken tension that only grew stronger the more I tried to suppress it. Just as I was about to get up and retreat to my room, Nancy appeared in the living room doorway, drying her hands on a dish towel. She didn't speak immediately, just stood there for a moment, her gaze locking onto mine. The intensity in her eyes sent a shiver down my spine, and I felt my heartbeat quicken. "You okay?" she asked softly, her voice carrying an undertone I couldn't quite decipher. I nodded, though my throat felt constricted. "Yeah, just thinking." Nancy stepped further into the room, casually tossing the dish towel onto a nearby chair before perching on the edge of the couch, only a few feet away from me. The air between us was thick with strain, my heart thudding loudly in my chest. "About what?" she asked, her eyes searching mine intently. I hesitated, unsure how to respond. The truth was, she had been on my mind constantly, this connection. Ever since that night in the kitchen. But I didn't know how to put it into words, wasn't sure I was ready to face the reality of what was unfolding between us. "Just everything," I finally murmured, my voice barely audible. Nancy gave a small nod, her gaze still locked on me. "Yeah, same here." For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence heavy with all the things we weren't saying. I could feel the unspoken pull between us, an undeniable force growing stronger with every second. I knew I should get up and walk away before things spoiled by the friend-saver I was ready for, but I stayed rooted in place. Instead, I found myself leaning closer to her, drawn in by an invisible force I could no longer resist. Nancy didn't pull away. Her gaze locked with mine, her eyes softening, and I could see the same longing reflected in her expression. She wanted this just as much as I did. "We said we'd take it slow," I whispered, my voice unsteady. Nancy's lips curved into a small, knowing smile that made my heart race. "We are taking it slow," she replied gently. "But that doesn't mean we have to ignore what's happening." Her words sent a spark through me, and before I could think twice, I leaned in, closing the space between us, and whispered, "Don't worry, you can trust me." Nancy leaned in too, her lips brushing softly against mine in a kiss that was tender and hesitant, like the very first time. But this time, there was no uncertainty, no guilt, just the two of us, finally surrendering to the tension that had been simmering for weeks. The kiss grew deeper, unhurried and intentional, and I felt Nancy's hand slide up to rest on the back of my neck, pulling me closer. Nancy, live with the intensity of the moment, it was as if the world around us disappeared, leaving only her. Her touch, her warmth, her presence. "Elliot." When we finally pulled away, both of us were breathing hard, our foreheads pressed together as we tried to steady ourselves. The world seemed to fade into the background, and for a brief moment, it felt like we were the only ones who existed. "We should probably stop," I murmured, though I didn't mean it. My hands lingered on her waist, unwilling to let go. Nancy smiled softly, her fingers brushing against my face. "Do you really want to stop?" she asked. I hesitated, my heart pounding. I don't know. I just don't want to ruin anything, I admitted. She sighed gently, her forehead still touching mine. I get it, but maybe we're not ruining anything. Maybe we're just figuring things out. Her words lingered between us, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was right. This didn't feel like a mistake or something wrong. It felt like something inevitable, something that had been waiting to come to light. I don't know what we're supposed to do, I whispered. Nancy leaned closer. But I do, she said. At that moment, I couldn't hold back anymore, and she could see it. Then she kissed me, with passion, and we let ourselves fall into it completely. It was incredible, so consuming that I lost track of everything except the intimacy and the way it felt like nothing else mattered. Maybe because I was so caught up in the moment, it was over faster than I'd hoped. But she didn't seem to mind. In a way, it felt like a weight had been lifted. After a moment, she moved, stood up and said, "We'll figure it out," before disappearing upstairs. I nodded, but deep down, I knew it wasn't going to be that simple. The days that followed felt surreal, like we were living in a bubble outside of normal reality. Nancy and I had crossed a boundary, and there was no undoing it. Every glance, every touch, every shared moment seemed heavier, filled with an unspoken intensity that neither of us acknowledged aloud. We didn't talk about what had happened, but the connection between us was unmistakable, a constant presence that we couldn't ignore. I tried to stick to my usual routine, but everything felt different. I became acutely aware of Nancy, how her footsteps echoed in the house, how her gaze lingered on me when we were in the same room. It was as if the air around us had changed, charged with something unspoken that neither of us dared to confront. One evening, around a week after that second kiss, we were alone in the house again. My dad and Betty had gone out to dinner, leaving behind a quiet that seemed to amplify every thought and feeling. I sat at the kitchen table, absent-mindedly flipping through a magazine I wasn't really reading, trying to distract myself from the tension that seemed to grow with each passing moment. Nancy entered the kitchen, her movements slow and deliberate, and I felt my pulse quicken as she took a seat across from me. The dim light from the overhead lamp cast soft shadows on her face, highlighting the intensity of the moment. She didn't speak right away, just looked at me with an unreadable expression. Eventually, she broke the silence. "We need to talk," she said, her voice calm but resolute. I put the magazine down, my heart pounding. I had been bracing for this conversation, knowing it was inevitable. We couldn't keep acting like nothing had happened, couldn't keep ignoring the unspoken tension that hung heavily between us. "Yeah," I said, my voice unsteady. "I guess we do." Nancy leaned forward, clasping her hands together on the table. She didn't speak at first, just looked at me, as though searching for the right way to begin. The silence between us was heavy, almost suffocating, and the weight of all the unsaid things bore down on me. "I don't know what to do," she said quietly, her voice laced with uncertainty and vulnerability. "I don't know how we're supposed to act now." I nodded, swallowing hard, struggling to find the right words. Me neither. The truth was, I didn't have any answers. I had no idea how to navigate what had happened between us or how to move forward. All I knew was that everything had shifted, and there was no returning to what we'd been before. My breaths. "Do you regret it?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely audible. The question caught me off guard, and a wave of panic swept over me. Regret? Did I regret the kisses, the moments we'd shared, the connection that had been growing between us? My mind raced, but deep down the answer was clear, even if admitting it scared me. "No," I said softly, shaking my head. "I don't regret it." Her shoulders eased slightly, and I caught a glimpse of relief in her eyes. "Me neither," she said, her voice gentle. But I'm scared. I frowned, leaning closer. Scared of what? I asked. She sighed, running a hand through her hair as she attempted to gather her thoughts. I'm afraid of what this all means, she confessed, her voice shaking. I'm afraid of what happens if we move forward. And I'm afraid of what happens if we don't. Her words struck me deeply, and I felt a tightness rise in my throat. I understood her completely, because I felt the same way. Part of me wanted to keep going, to see where this bond between us might lead, but another part of me was paralyzed by fear of the repercussions, fear of what it might mean for our family, for my father, for Betty. I don't know what the right choice is, I murmured, my voice bringing me odd. But I don't want to lose you. Nancy lifted her gaze to meet mine, her eyes brimming with emotion. You won't, she whispered, but we need to figure this out. I gave a small nod, my heart thudding in my chest. Yeah, we do. For a long while we sat there in silence, the weight of the conversation pressing down on us. The tension between us was still palpable, intense, and electric. But there was something new now, a mutual understanding, a shared realization that we couldn't continue the way we had been. A decision had to be made. Nancy abruptly stood, her chair scraping the floor as she moved toward the window. She paused there, gazing out at the dimming sky, her arms folded tightly across her chest. I observed her in silence, my thoughts swirling as I struggled to find the right words or actions. Finally, she spoke, her back still to me. What if we took a break? A break? I repeated, my brow furrowing. Nancy turned to face me, her expression somber. Yes, a break from whatever this is. We need time to think, to figure out what we really want. Her suggestion was logical, yet it filled me with unease. The idea of stepping back, of creating distance between us, made my chest constrict. Still, I couldn't deny the truth in her words. We couldn't keep stumbling forward, lost in something neither of us fully understood. Maybe that's a good idea, I murmured, the admission weighing heavily on my tongue. She nodded, her gaze softening as it met mine. We don't have to decide anything right now, she said gently. But we need space to sort things out. I swallowed hard and gave a small nod of agreement. Yeah, you're right. The silence that followed felt different, less tense, more reflective. The weight between us had lifted slightly, replaced by a fragile sense of clarity and mutual understanding. We didn't have everything figured out, but we had taken the first step toward understanding, and for now, that was enough. Nancy returned to the table, sitting across from me once more. She reached out and took my hand in hers, and the simple act sent a wave of warmth through me. Her touch was familiar and soothing, and at that moment I realized that no matter what happened, I couldn't imagine losing her. She meant too much to me. We'll figure it out, she said softly, her thumb gently brushing over the back of my hand. One day at a time, I nodded, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. One day at a time. And in that moment, I knew she was right. We didn't need to rush or have all the answers right away. All we needed was to take things one day at a time and let them unfold naturally. As the evening went on, the tension between us gradually melted away, replaced by a quiet sense of calm. We didn't need to discuss what had happened or what the future might hold. All that mattered was being there for each other, taking things slow, and sorting out our feelings at our own pace. That night, we didn't kiss again or try to push things further. Instead, we sat together in the stillness of the kitchen, holding hands and talking about nothing in particular, simply enjoying each other's presence. The weight of our situation lingered, but it didn't feel as overwhelming as before. We had taken a small but important step toward understanding where we stood, and for now, that was enough. As the minutes turned into hours and the quiet of the house surrounded us, a realization settled over me. Whatever happened next, whatever decisions Nancy and I made in the days ahead, one thing was certain: I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But deep down, I wasn't bothered by it at all. That's the end of today's episode. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the content, please give us a thumbs up and share it with your friends and family. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Love 30K Stories, and turn on notifications to stay current with all our future uploads. Your support is incredibly important to us. Take care, and see you soon.